Good evening, and welcome to this called meeting of the Northside Board of Trustees. It is not a public forum, however, we do provide the opportunity for audience participation. If there is anyone who would like to address the board during an agenda item, we ask that you please complete a sign-up sheet located at the entrance to this room. This is so we do not overlook anyone who would like to speak to the board. We will review the rules for addressing the board later in the evening. Is there anyone here who would like to sign up to an agenda item that has not done so? Very well. This meeting will be conducted via video conference and was posted as such under Texas Government Code 551.127, which will be audible to the board and public and allow for communication among trustees. At this time, we will take attendance by roll call for the record. Trustee Joseph Medina.
Present.
Trustee Gerald Lopez. I don't know that we've... Mr. Lopez, can you... Okay. Trustee Corinne Saldana. Corinne Saldana is not here this evening. Trustee Melissa Chumley. She is not present yet, but we anticipate her coming soon. Trustee Dr. Carol Harrell. Here. And Trustee Karen Freeman, and I'm here. Again, under Texas Government Code 551.127, we do have a quorum of the board, either present or attending by teleconference.
Hey, Karen, one more. Unless there's something I didn't know, I'm present too.
I will have Dr. Woods explain this, because we do have, there is an exemption for a quorum to be present. And it has to do with the fact that Northside occupies 3 counties, and because we have 3 counties, we actually only need 1 person or 1 member of the board here. Do I have that right, Dr. Woods?
That is correct. But we will note for the minutes that Mr. Blunt is present in person.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't call you. I apologize. That's what you were asking for. Okay, we'll get on with this. The meeting will now be officially called to order. Please stand and bow your heads as Trustee Joseph Medina leads us in the invocation and pledges of allegiance.
Almighty and merciful God, we ask you for guidance and your blessings upon this board, students, parents, patrons, teachers, and administrators, as we assemble here this evening in the common pursuit of this great nation's wealth, our children. Amen.
Amen. To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Honor the Texas flag.
I pledge allegiance to Texas, one state, under God, one indivisible. Thank you, Mr. Medina. All right, so we'll jump right into the agenda item. Dr. Woods.
Yes, ma'am. Whoops, there we go. Yes, ma'am. Ms. Freeman, we have 2 presentations to make to the board tonight, both on the same topic, and that is our study of a potential bond program that the board could call in either January or early February of this month for a May election. So we thought we'd cover 2 items. The first is survey data. We actually did more surveying this time than we have in previous bonds, and so I know the board has seen some of this information, but we want to walk through it kind of in a summative way tonight, so the board has a good picture of what that survey data said. We did 2 surveys of frequent voters. Those are scientific surveys. And then we did 2 opt-in surveys of parents and of staff, 1 each of parents and of staff. So I'm going to walk through that, and please stop me along the way if there are questions or comments. Once we complete the survey presentation, we'll walk through the actual project recommendations and talk a little bit about the Citizens Bond Committee recommendations. So as you can see here, there are the 4 surveys that I laid out. the first and the second phone survey, they're two scientific ones that we'll spend the most time on going through results of those two, comparing them against each other and comparing them to a degree against what we saw when we did a similar survey in 2017. Then you see the staff and parent participation. We'll walk briefly through those. So starting with the phone surveys, these were the parts of the district that we tried to get a good sample from in each one, and you can see what parts of the district fall into what the zone names are. Those were purely randomized numbers. There's no significance to those in any way, and you can see where the participants in the two phone surveys came from, what parts of the district, and you can see we've got pretty good representation out of each of those 5 zones. Moving on to the next slide, which shows us the first information. This is about phone survey number 1. This was conducted in July of this year. And so at the top of the survey, or near the top of the survey, after we ask some introductory questions, we ask folks about supporting a bond election of various capital needs. This is before, in the survey, we would walk folks through the proposed projects. So this is kind of before folks get educated via the survey. And you can see that there was just over 50% were support or strongly support the notion of a capital campaign to be up on the ballot for May. Staying with phone survey number 1 on slide number 6 there, at that time, we were unsure both of exactly which projects would be in the final list, and we were unsure of exactly what would have to stand alone on its own proposition. As the board knows, since we last did a bond election and a bond proposal, the legislature has changed the statute, and there are certain projects that must stand by themselves as a bond proposition, and so that uncertainty existed at the time. So we asked about 3 groups of projects, as you can see: schools and support facilities, technology and safety and security, and then finally athletics and fine arts improvements. On slide 7, what you see is a pattern that commonly exists, and that is, if you lay out for folks what the proposal might be in terms of total dollars, what would happen with support. And as we have seen over and over as we've done these through the years, support tends to wane the higher the dollar amount in the survey. And this is true of universally true of any group that you survey. This is the pattern that you see, and it certainly holds true here. So when we ask specifically about technology and safety and security improvements, you can see up to a certain dollar amount, you can see again, the survey has a tendency to decline as you go up in possible dollar amounts, but you get some sense of where folks would be okay to have their money spent. Then we asked next, same question about athletics and fine arts improvements. Again, the pattern holds true. And then this is the question, we always circle back to the question after we've read folks a number of questions and they have a better sense of what the proposed projects might be, what kinds of things are we proposing to spend the dollars on. We circle back to now knowing what you know, would you support or oppose an election, and then we give a more specific amount. In this case, this year we surveyed on $900 million. 4 years ago when we were doing this survey, we surveyed on $800 million when we asked this question. And here you can see the 2017 and the 2021 numbers compared to each other. Very similar on strongly support and slightly higher on general support in 2021 than what we saw in 2017. So that gives you a sense, and again, this is comparing our phone survey number 1 to the only one that we did of this type in 2017, just for comparison purposes. So next, we're going to move to the second survey that was done of frequent voters This was stood up in December of last year, and you're going to see somewhat similar questions. So this is the question we asked towards the top of the survey. Now we're surveying actually on a larger number. We actually used the number of 1 billion. And so we asked folks about this combination of projects, and then you can see we actually get a stronger number of support and strongest support here than we did on the same question that was asked at a lower dollar amount in July of this year. So this one specifically asks about the 2 athletics projects that ended up being discussed with the Citizens Bond Committee. There are 2 projects that we discussed, and we'll talk about those in much greater detail when we get to the actual project list. But they are the Block Aquatic Center, which is adjacent, as you all know, adjacent to this facility and is coming on 50 years old. Actually, in 2022 is 50 years old. And an additional baseball and softball field that would be a district complex, a district competition field, but built on property adjacent to where Sotomayor High School is currently under construction. So this one I thought was interesting. It's one of the reasons we pulled it and put it in this deck, and that is that even in the case of those 2 particular projects, there is support just over 50%, obviously not as strong as the overall proposal, for those 2 projects. On the next slide, we are asking the question that we ask after folks are educated towards the end of survey number 2. And you can see support and strongest support rose from 66 at the beginning of this particular survey to 70 here, and it is also notably stronger than what we saw when we surveyed in July. So let me, I know that was
A lot.
moving fast and a lot. And the rest of this presentation goes into the other surveys, that of staff and of parents that were opt-in surveys. So let me stop there and see if there are questions or comments that I can try to respond to.
Yeah, so, I'm sorry, any, Bobby?
I guess 2 things. I know, I think if Leanne is there, Melissa's trying to get in, she just needs her Zoom link. I think okay, yeah, I sent her, yeah. No, just one quick question beyond that. I was trying to remember historically, the undecided, it seems like people are pretty decided either way. Is that unusual, or do you recall, Dr. Woods, that undecided?
I'm glad you said that because I noticed the same. There was a greater percentage in the survey in 2017 said that they were unsure.
Right.
And we did not see a lot of that in either the July survey or in December, but it was actually less so in December than it was in July. If that, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Karen?
Dr. Harrell? Yes.
Just real quick, at the beginning of the presentation, was May the only choice given in the survey for when the bond would be held?
Yes, ma'am, that was the only date we mentioned in either survey.
Okay, thanks. And I guess no other discussion was about that. Nobody brought anything else up related to when the bond would be held?
No, ma'am, that has not come up, but to be frank, we haven't given folks that choice either. Obviously, we've had some conversation as trustees and myself about that timing, but no conversation in like the Citizens Bond Committee or any place like that.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Lopez, are you good? Any questions?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. I think all right, Dr. Woods.
Okay, so I'll move on to slide 15, and this begins some conversation about a staff survey. We had roughly 5,500 staff opt into the survey and give us responses. Remember, though, this is folks opting in. This isn't a scientific sampling in any way. So what you see here is that the majority, the clear majority of the respondents, actually close to 80%, are residents of the school district. And so obviously they have a stake in these projects from a taxpayer point of view. And you can see they tend to skew towards longer terms of employment, with over 40% being in the over 10-year or more employment with the school district. That same pattern holds true when you look at the demographics of frequent voters. As you know, they have a tendency to skew a little older than perhaps the average parent. So the pattern that you saw in the phone surveys also, however, holds true, relatively true, in that as you ask folks about larger dollar amounts, support wanes. If you ask them about smaller dollar amounts, support generally improves, and that pattern holds true with staff. So in that next slide, we asked more specifically about the athletics and fine arts. Slightly stronger support here, but still you see the pattern of greater dollars equals slightly less support. On slide 18, we asked folks about specific projects that fall into that category. So in this case, we're talking about the baseball field and the Block Aquatic Center that we mentioned, and then fine arts facilities at existing schools. And you can see relatively strong support for, and again among staff, for all three of those projects. And then towards the end of the survey, we asked the question of support for roughly a $900 million total proposition in multiple propositions perhaps. And you can see how those results compared very similarly if you add support and strongly support together compared to 2018. And then the pattern that Mr. Blunt pointed out is also true in this survey as well. So on to the parent survey, just a couple of slides here about what we saw. And again, you see the pattern, although the pattern of less support for more dollars declines among parents, which I thought was interesting. The pattern still exists, but it's not as pronounced as it is among general voters or even among staff. So that's an interesting observation. Not sure what it says to us, but it is an interesting observation. And then obviously we asked parents about groups of projects. You can see very strong support for things like replacing roofs and air conditioning units at older schools, very strong support for modernizing schools, and slightly better than half support for the Block Aquatic Center project specifically.
Dr. Woods, we were moving fast. Can we go back to the previous slide
Yes,
again?
ma'am.
And when we told them about that there would not be a tax increase, you said there was more. Tell me about the difference between the parent and the staff.
What I was observing was just that the pattern that we've seen in the other two groups, where you can see this kind of direct correlation between, or indirect correlation actually, between dollars and support, that you don't see the pattern as strongly amongst this group of respondents as we did in the other two.
Okay. Thank you.
And then one more slide, and happy to go back and review anything anybody likes. So the last slide is towards the end of the survey for parents. Again, go back now that folks have had an opportunity to read what we might propose, a sense of the proposal. We asked the question, and you can see support and strongly support put together is about right at 3/4 of the total respondents in those two answers. So again, no, that's a lot. Typically, we wouldn't have spent this much time on survey data, but we did more of it, so I thought it would be better to synthesize it for the board. I'm happy to go over more tonight, and also happy to answer questions, if it occurred to you some other time. Obviously, we've got reams of data from those slides, especially the two that were done in a scientific sample, so happy to provide any level of data. Just thought we'd give you a 10,000-foot look so that you can see what we're seeing and some of what we were able to tell the Citizens Bond Committee when we met with them in the fall.
Thank you. Questions from the board? Okay. Dr. Harrell or Mr. Lopez? I do have, did we do a staff survey last bond? Okay.
We did, Mrs. Freeman. It was done in almost an identical way where folks could access it using their employee credentials and opt in to complete the survey. So the answer is yes. It was very similar to what we did in 2017. I don't believe we had done that prior to 2017, but I do recall distinctly setting it up for the last one.
And the other question I have is regarding our athletic facilities, or at least George Block, where it would be a renovation. Did we, when we talked to the people that were in the survey, did we mention anything about safety issues, or we told them the scope of I just wondered how much in detail, because I noticed that in here, safety is a big deal for a lot of our, a lot of the people who answered it, and they tend to be more favorable to correct those situations where it pertains to the safety of children. And certainly some of that renovation is about the safety. Did we talk about that, do you know?
Let me look at Barry and make sure I'm saying this is true, so tell me if I'm not. But I believe all we asked about was a renovation project to repair or replace a 50-year-old facility. I believe, I don't think we got into the why and that kind of thing. And certainly, Mrs. Freeman, what you say about the safety aspect of it is true, but it's also about access and how many of our own students can be in that building at once, given its size, compared to the other facility we have out at 1604. So that's, it's also an issue of access and equity in those two buildings as well. But in the answer to the question, we did not go into that in the survey. As you know, with surveys, there's always the challenge of combining, giving folks all the information you want them to have, and yet having it be palatable so that they'll stay in and answer all the way to the end. So that's the answer to that question. If the board ended up approving that project, then obviously that information would be a part of the education campaign that would be given to the public.
Okay. Is somebody talking, excuse me, is somebody talking to Melissa? Is she still having a hard time getting on? Do we know?
Leanne and I both have emailed her the Zoom link.
Okay.
She does have that information, and I'll text her right now.
Okay, just wanted to be sure that if she had any, I know y'all are very good about helping us get in if there were some challenges. All right.
Sharon, I have a quick question.
Oh, yes, Dr. Harrell.
Just real quick, I'm not sure the level of specificity, but was the fine arts proposal, was it for renovation and expansion? Or was it more like auditorium?
We got into the details of the fine arts project a little bit less, Dr. Harrell, because at some point along the way, we realized that because that project is directly tied to a school and is used as a teaching facility all day, every day, it does not need to stand alone as its own proposition. And so in similar answer to the question that Mrs. Freeman asked, we did not go into the details of the who and the why in the survey.
Okay, thank you. And then real quick, if I was an employee, a parent, and a staff, did I get 2 input opportunities, or did it allow me only to submit my input as a parent or a staff member?
You actually had both opportunities. So if you chose to fill out the survey both as a parent and as an employee, you could have done that.
Okay, thanks.
Aaron, I have a question. I have 2 questions.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead, Mr. Lopez.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Woods, on the survey, and maybe we may be getting too into the weeds, but on the general survey, in the first phone survey, was there an age difference in the approval rating of the bond? Do we have that information? And the reason why I'm asking is because generally we'll have, the young parents that will always support that, but then it kind of tends to weigh a little bit less and less as the children leave from home and families, and then there's, you know, you know, a population of the voters that don't have kids in the school district and generally oppose any type of increase for a bond. Did we get any of that information, or did we have that?
We do have that information. We can break it out by each age group. And so the question is answerable. I can't answer it off the top of my head, but we could certainly get that information to you and to trustees. What I will say about the demographics of both surveys, the frequent voter surveys, is that they skew older. So the average answerer, if you will, of those surveys is 60 and older. And while there is some of the demographic that does fall younger than that, it is greatly outnumbered by the demographic that is older than that average age. But the question is definitely answerable given the data that we have.
Okay, good. Thank you for that one. My next question, Dr. Woods, is it was similar to what Dr. Brown was mentioning about the fine arts. And I definitely understand the fine arts and us using it, because it does have so many classes that we're going to be using there at that standalone fine arts. It encompasses music, it encompasses art classes and dance classes and things like that. And I think that's great, but there are some campuses that I know that have had issues in the past, and so I was wondering if some of those projects floated up, or maybe we'll get to this in the next presentation. But I was a little concerned about that as well. I'm just kind of seeing where that is because I agree with the standalone, fine arts building, but I'm curious to know where the other projects lie when it came to fine arts classrooms at different campuses. So,
I think if I understand the question correctly, if anywhere, that'll come up in the next presentation where we actually talk about the project list. There are more than one fine arts project total, certainly in the bond, and we'll walk through some of those in this next presentation.
okay, thank you.
Okay, Dr. Woods, then we need to go on. Before we get to the second agenda item, I just want to recognize one person here in the audience that I see, Dave Gannon. Dave, thanks for joining us. Dave was a facilitator in all the meetings of the Citizen Bond Advisory Committee, and it's appreciate you being here to hear this discussion. I don't know if there's anybody else here that was on the CBAC.
Don't recognize anybody else, and I was just getting ready to do the same thing, Ms. Freeman, so thanks for doing it.
Okay, sure. And I'd also like to welcome Monica. Monica, welcome, and we welcome you, and we'll be seeing more of you at our board meeting. So thanks for being here, and thanks for all you did to help get this stood up here tonight. Okay, Dr. Woods.
Okay, so the second of the presentations is actually the projects that were proposed to the Citizens Bond Committee. Talk a little bit about the Citizens Bond Committee process that, as Mrs. Freeman said, we began that process with the Citizens Bond Committee in the fall, meeting in large group. Folks had an option to attend in person, or they could attend via live stream. The purpose of those meetings was to kind of level set. The room is made up of folks who have definitely been through this before, and they have a sense of what is a bond and why do schools do them and what projects can you build with those funds and so forth. And then you've got folks especially on the parent side of the group, who have never been through this process. And so that first 2 meetings are educational, and we really try to get everybody to the same level of understanding about why we're there. Then the next 2 meetings were held in breakout groups. Those were held virtually in Zoom groups, and that's where the group was broken up into 6 subcommittees. Mr. Gannon was a citizen lead in one of those subcommittees, and then obviously we had a citizen and a staff lead in each of those subcommittees. And then they came back, the subcommittees, and made a recommendation to the full group at the last meeting of that group late in the fall semester. So that's the way the Citizens Bond Committee process was conducted. And interestingly, the Citizens Bond groups were united in their recommendation around doing the full project list that we showed them at the beginning of the project. So let me just walk through this list. And again, just as last time, please stop me along the way. I've got folks here who know these projects in great detail and can walk through, help us walk through them if we need to do that. So you can see on that second slide, this is the how were the projects selected. This may get at Mr. Lopez's question specific to fine arts. So what we try to do is look at information from a number of sources to include obviously resource planning. Where in the district are we growing such that we need to consider new schools? From the administration at our schools, we do a survey of our principals and look for commonalities in the things that they're saying. Department reviews, which come from various groups who have more specialized facilities on each campus, such as a library, for instance. Obviously, our maintenance department, who knows where we're having maintenance issues, where the maintenance of a particular item, such as an HVAC system, might be costing us such that it would be better long-term to replace that aging system than to keep trying to maintain it. Obviously, that applies to things like paving and roofing and those kinds of projects as well. Clearly, our construction and engineering staff, who are familiar with our buildings and the conditions, especially the older buildings. And then, as the board is familiar with, master planning, which is a review of our existing older facilities, looking at if we're going to do work at this facility, where does it make sense to do that work? And then, obviously, all of this gets woven together with an eye to you can't afford to do everything that you would put on a list. When Mr. San Miguel and I, Mr. Wiggins, Mr. Villarreal sat down and began discussing this, gentlemen, 8 months ago, 7 months ago, something like that, we had a list that was much larger than the one that we ended up taking to the Citizens Bond group because we know that folks have only so much tolerance for so much spending. And so obviously that's a factor that gets woven into what projects get proposed. So continuing on that same theme on the next slide, we also look at for patterns in minor construction project requests, which administrators turn in to the facilities group, to the maintenance group, and then a review of previous bonds. And if we had considered an item, say in the 2018 bond, and it got deferred because of cost concerns or whatever, we obviously consider it again in the next list of projects. So again, on what are we considering when we're looking at projects, clearly closing the gap between old and new is what dominates, it is what dominated the 2018 proposal that the board considered at that time and our voters considered. It is what even more so dominates this particular proposal. The vast majority of the work proposed in this set of offerings is for that purpose. To go back to our older schools, 40 to 70 years old, and do work there such that we're bringing them closer to the standard that we would build a new school at today. And then clearly there are other factors. Safety and security, Mrs. Freeman already mentioned that. Operational items that are critical to the school. Our current district standard, which obviously changes over time, some of which is in response to regulatory issues and some of which is just how we see schools operating well. compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act, cost avoidances, I already mentioned that in the case of, say, a roofing system or an HVAC system. Structural issues, if we have concerns there, obviously we try to address those. There are always new instructional programs you will see, and I realize you have already seen in this list of projects a number of magnet school projects, some of which are at the middle schools, which we've already begun. And then heavily influencing this list, this particular proposal, is ventilation improvements in our older buildings. Obviously, we have always looked at ventilation improvements and done those projects, but the things that we've learned in the last 2 years have made that more important. And so the board will recall we have committed some funds out of the federal ESSER dollars and specifically out of ESSER 2 to address ventilation systems at 11 campuses. And this would address the bulk of the rest. So we're cobbling together different proposals in order to get at those projects over time. So let me talk a little bit about costs. And I'm going to add a caveat to what's on here. So what you will see is the total cost of the project that we estimate to include construction, furniture, and equipment, getting the building completely stood up and ready to take in students and have them be educated well. And so the costs represent that. Now, Mr. San Miguel and his staff and I struggle each time we construct a bond proposal to try to estimate inflationary pressures in the future. When we start building this particular proposal, we were doing the work starting in the summer of 2021, knowing that some of these projects would not be bid until as late as 2026. So that's quite a period of time, estimating 4.5 years worth of inflationary pressure. And so what you will see was our best estimate as we went through the fall of what that inflationary pressure would be, and trying to estimate which of these projects would be built early in the bond from a time perspective and which would be built later. Obviously, the ones being built later, we tried to add more inflationary consideration to. Unfortunately, in the last week or so, we have heard of some school districts in this immediate area, not necessarily in Bexar County, but in very close, who have gotten some bids on new schools that are of significant concern to us from a cost perspective. And so while you will see exact dollars proposed tonight, Mr. San Miguel and his staff are kind of frantically getting with contractors and other school districts in the state and looking at where projects are coming in that have bid very recently. So we may have to make some adjustments to some of the dollar figures that you will see tonight. Obviously, we will do that prior to the board considering any action on any of the on a potential bond proposal, but I wanted to add that caveat for you because it is kind of late-breaking and somewhat concerning news that we're dealing with. So we will try to wrap up in the next literally couple of days what we think that impact might be, and if it makes adjustments to these, we will walk those through when we talk to the board about this at our next meeting. Yes, sir.
Can I acknowledge one other, it's not really a question, but I do want to acknowledge that had to be very difficult with the supply chain and other issues too to do that, so appreciate y'all working through that.
Yes, sir, that's, it's something we struggle with each time we construct a bond proposal, but this time was obviously much more challenging than it has been in the past. And the comment I just made about where some projects have come in the last few days is just more evidence of that challenge. So we're going to do our best to assess that in the next 5 days, and we'll let you know what our recommendation is the next time we visit about it. So on the next slide, we divided, when we went to the Citizens Bond Group and we showed them the total list of the projects, we divided them into 8 categories, and you can see what those categories are on there on slide 6, from new schools all the way down to transportation and bond management. As the board well knows, we've made decisions for a long time in this district to maintain our bond program in-house. We don't contract folks out to manage our bond program. We think that Northside employees who have a stake in the district are better making those decisions. And so we add a category called bond management because there are staff in Leroy and Jacob's group who spend 100% of their time doing bond work. And so we fund those staff members out of that management line item. So I'm getting ready, Mrs. Freeman, to walk literally through the list of projects, and I'm gonna move at a pretty good clip until somebody stops me. There are a couple that, because things have changed, I'm gonna highlight, and you'll see them highlighted to help me remember which ones to talk to you about. But before I do that, I thought I'd pause and see if there were questions or comments.
First off, I'm so sorry. Being retired is wonderful, however, I can't get all of my technology transferred over, so I was sitting at Verizon for 4 hours, and then they had to undo what they had done to get me to be able to come to the meeting. So I apologize. I hate technology. No offense to any of our technology people. I love y'all. Brian, I had a question. So it was on the one on page 11, it showed on the survey that after the survey, the strong support actually went down 5 percentage points, but then it went up on the support side. I found that odd. And then on the bond program management that you just talked about, are we talking about Leroy hiring any additional staff during that? Because I thought I remembered, maybe not last time, but the last time before, where we actually hired staff, but they knew that it was just for the period of time that we had the bond. Are we talking about doing that again?
The length of time that we say on these advertisements for the position is for the life of the bond. And as bonds go up, in terms of projects, things of that nature, we hire 1, 2, maybe 3 more positions.
So that's what this is in reference to, is hiring new positions, not necessarily, I mean, because we're already paying our staff, so.
No, it's both. It's both existing staff who spend all of their time working on bond work, as well as any additional staff that we might bring on to manage a project list this size.
Okay, so aren't we already paying our staff?
Yes, ma'am, but we're paying them out of voter-approved bond funds from previous bonds.
Okay, I'm sorry, that's what I was missing, is we're just moving the monies then, so that if our staff, we can pay for our staff that is now going to be only focused on the bond program through our bond funds.
I think the best way to say it is to continue to pay most of them, yes. There are some other factors to this. There is a cost of issuance. When you sell bonds, you're paying some folks in the profession to assist with that. So there are some other costs in that kind of broad bond management line item, but the lion's share of those dollars are to pay our staff.
But the big thing, I think, that it's important that the public knows is that we are not going out and hiring a bond. You know, we've had some other districts in San Antonio that have gone out and hired a person or company to oversee all of their bond, and we're not doing that. We're staying with our staff, which is what we need to do.
Yes, ma'am.
Y'all know how to do this.
That's
so.
correct. We think we get better expertise for that, and we get it at a greatly reduced cost compared to contracting.
I completely agree with that. I just wanted to make sure that that was clarified. Thank you, Brian.
I think we're good, Dr. Wood.
Okay. So if we can go to slide, sorry. Oh, sorry, yeah, you're on the right one, I wasn't. So the first project that's shown there is the one new school that we recommend being constructed. That village at West Point is a very fast-growing, this is the Harlan area, if you think of that space just south of Harlan, that we have built multiple schools in that area in recent bonds. and we are proposing to build one additional school in that very large and fast-growing area out there in the 2022 bond proposal, and that is it. All of the rest of what you will see is renovation and reconstruction work and long-term maintenance work. That is essentially everything else you will see. So on to slide 8, you can see potential projects here. The fine arts facility that we kind of focused on and at the beginning weren't absolutely sure did not have to stand on its own was that Clark Fine Arts replacement. This is a project very similar to the one we completed at Holmes High School in the 2018 bond and are getting ready to kick off. Completed at Holmes in the 2014 bond and are getting ready to kick off at John Jay using funds from the 2018 bond.
Brian, can you do a quick, what are we doing at Sol Ross in the athletics?
This is a complete reconstruction of that athletic space at Sol Ross. Gyms, athletic rooms, PE locker space, all of that.
Okay, do we have anywhere for the, that dungeon area of their fine arts? Or is that part of this in any manner? Because that, remember when we did when we've looked at Ross, there were 2 areas, and that was one, and we're having problems there. That's not part of it, though.
I'm not seeing Leroy and Brian saying that it is.
Mr. San Miguel, could you please go to the mic? Thank you.
Yeah, I think the challenge we've got at Sol Ross is how do you do major construction there without the entire campus having to be vacated?
So when we looked at the master plan for Sol Ross, we looked at it in 2 pieces. One is the instructional, which is the main campus, and then we looked at the athletics/CTE/fine arts. And given the proposition that we have here for $23 million, it only includes the athletic area. If we wanted to add the fine arts area, there's about a $15 million deficit there.
So are we talking about when we say athletic area, are we talking about the gym?
That's correct. The gyms is attached to the cafeteria and the standalone building. That's where the
It's
master
on
plan.
the left, right, in the back on the left?
Yes, on the back area, because that's where we would start the building process on that quadrant. Over time, we could go next to the CTE and obviously the fine arts area as well.
And when we made up this plan, we talked to the principals as to the priority of the needs that were on the campus?
We talked a little bit about that too, that they actually saw the master plans. And obviously, if you ask the campus, they're going to want the fine arts as well. However, the dollar value that we have here is $23 million just for the athletic portion of the campus. The other thing we could do, and it's something, I know we're getting way into the weeds, but it's something, if you look at the primary gym, it's attached to the backside of the cafeteria. So part of our thinking is we can build a standalone athletic with the 2 gyms that normally would be at a middle school, leave that portion, and then go renovate that in the interim for a fine arts to give them more
Well, it's
space.
just, we have real problems with that dungeon area there.
Right, and so we could do
And it's
that.
still, I know y'all have gone out and changed it, and I'm sorry
Yes.
I'm in the weeds, but I really do want to know.
Right.
And I guess the biggest thing is for general across the board, all principals were given, this is what we are looking at in the bond program for your campus, and they all reviewed that.
Yes, they saw the master plans.
Okay, Leroy, I'm sorry, on the semantics. They saw the master plan. What I'm asking is, did all principals see the bond list of what was going to happen
Just-
at their campus and have their input into that?
Yes, we
So
did.
what went to the bond committee, that this is what's going to be given to the bond committee for your school, all principals saw that?
Yes, when we talked about the master plan, we said, this is what phase 1 looks like, this is why we would recommend this first, give us your input.
Okay, I'm still not thinking you're answering my question, Leroy. I'm not talking about the master plan. I'm
Yeah,
talking
but
about.
that's how we started the
If I went
conversation.
to the principal at Pat Neff and said, this is what's in the bond plan that's going to the board, that went to the bond committee and is going to the board, this is what's going to be recommended for your
Yes.
campus.
Yes.
Not master plan, this is what's
Yes.
going to be
Yes.
in, this is what the board is going to see.
Yes,
They all saw that.
yes.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to make sure of that.
Karen, I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Lopez.
This question is for Leroy. Leroy, in kind of piggybacking off of what Melissa was saying, mentioning about the principals being included in the projects that were going to be happening in the renovation of the campuses. I'm glad to see that they were included, but did we also include the directors of those departments? Let's say for fine arts or for CTE, were those directors included? Because those individuals themselves have a very good understanding
Yes.
as to where some of the issues are as well. Were they included in that process as well for the putting the bond project together?
Yes.
Be presented?
Yes, they were. As a matter of fact, I will add that when we were building the bond, one of the first places that we went to is all the department heads, athletics, fine arts, CTE, special ed, library, et cetera. And we asked them, if you could give us what you think is our next round of improvements at any campus throughout the entire district, what would it be? And then we asked them prioritize that list for us, because obviously we're going to get a pretty sizable list. So not only that we share that information, or they gave us the information as a result of the questions and inquiries we had to the department heads, but they also got to see it when the principals saw the master plan, because they were also engaged in a conversation about, for example, fine arts and things of that nature, or athletics. They also got to see it at that level on the master planning side.
Okay. Yeah, do you have those documents as well?
Absolutely,
I'd like to see that as well.
absolutely.
As far as each of the directors, so
Yes.
it'd be helpful if I could see that information as well and what was submitted. Thank you, Leroy.
Yeah, Mr. Lopez, may I say something, though? Mr. Lopez, that's, what one trustee gets, if you're requesting that, everybody gets that. I'm not sure how feasible that is to distribute. Dr. Woods, what he's asking, I'm not sure.
I'm not familiar with the documents, to be honest. We'd have to look and see what that looks like.
I guess
Well, I was just asking whatever Leroy had said that there were documents that they had where they submitted as far as questions. I was just curious to see that. Yeah, and I agree with you. All the board members should see that. I was just asking
Yeah.
for.
I just,
So thank you for the clarification.
yeah, I think it's really difficult. I think the wants of the district, I think, are many. And with bond programs, we have to look at what's most important. And some things unfortunately get delayed, and we do have to prioritize what we do on the over 120 campuses and all of our facilities.
Yeah, as I said at the beginning, information, we started with a list much larger than this one, and for obvious reasons had to cut back on that list, thus delaying some of those projects. That has always been the case. That is not a new process. The wants of folks to get projects done always outstrips what we think that we can reasonably afford. That is not new.
Well, I just like the idea that, number one, I just wanted to make sure that we are aware that we still have that problem, and that you're looking at possibly being able to resolve some of it with what you're doing within the scope of this. However, this is primarily going to be that athletic replacement for Saul Ross.
Ms. Freeman, can I add something to that?
Yes, Dr. Harm.
So when I go back to the survey, it seemed like it was pretty even Steven, if you will, between athletics and fine arts. And that's the ear that I've been using to look at some of these projects. And so I'm just, I don't know at this juncture if we go back and consider what Leroy said based on Melissa's concern about the dungeon. I agree, it needs work along with the athletic. There's no denying both projects are needed. I'm just wondering why the athletics got chosen over the fine arts, or if there's a way to look at, we can do this at this point in time and then attend to the fine arts simultaneously, or something along those lines.
I think that's a constructability issue as much as anything else. In the case of that particular campus, we did look at what could be done to kind of spread the dollars around, and didn't feel like it was feasible to do some work in one part of the campus and some work in another. We really had to pick a place to start and just get after it in that place, thus delaying the other work that needs to be done there.
No, I understand that. I'm just thinking too, if one of the metrics was which program impacts the most amount of kids, and if that was used to make the decision that athletic facilities would be taken care of first.
I don't remember a conversation like that.
Is it something that we might want to think about? Or am I just, I'm just trying to look at it and the best ways to choose the projects that need to be done, that benefit the most amount of kids in the best ways possible. So maybe that's just where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I think it's something worth considering, but it becomes one variable in a set of maybe 3 dozen or so that has to be considered, when choosing a project. But I agree with you, support generally is pretty similar. None of these projects that we're identifying here need to stand alone in their own proposition, though. I should have said that at the beginning. What we're talking about here would all go in a general proposition, regardless of the nature of the project. I'll point out the ones that might need to stand alone much later.
What did you want us to tell us about Gus Stadium?
So late as we've done in previous bonds, the synthetic turf and the track surfacing at the 2 competition fields has a life cycle of about 8 or 10 years. In previous bonds, we have replaced it on that cycle. We had that in this list as well. However, towards the end of the process, when we were running through this list with the bond lawyers, there was an indication that because of that project was at a competition field and that there was more than 1,000 seats at such field, that this item would have to stand alone. We do not think it's reasonable to have a item of this size stand alone as its own proposition, and so we are going very likely to recommend that this item be removed and be paid for out of bond savings, rather than have it stand alone as its own proposition. That just doesn't seem a practical thing to do. So that was the reason it was highlighted, is because it was included in the initial conversation with the Citizens Bond Committee, but we would recommend eventually, once the board gets to taking action, that this item actually be pulled, and we cover that, and we do it, but we do it out of other funds, not out of Bond 2022.
Can y'all tell us when it was last done? Because it just seems like it was the other day.
It was almost 10 years ago.
I'm sorry?
About 9.
2015?
The cycle for replacement is about 10 years. So by the time this bond
So
program
this would be at
goes
the
mature.
end, so this would be one that would be in this, but you
But
would
later.
anticipate that it would be one of the last projects done, so we get our full
10
our
years
full
of-
value
Yes.
of the field
Right.
that's on there now.
And we did that the last go around as well.
Leroy, are they developing any kind of turf that has a little bit longer longevity than that?
Not to our knowledge. I mean, not to our knowledge that it lasts more than 10 years. We could stretch it 11 years, maybe even 12 years, but we take the risk of it failing on us.
Because I remember when we first put in artificial turf, long time ago, there was discussions of a 20-year time period. So
Right.
that wasn't ever really true.
Not really. I've taken turf in other school districts that are about 15 to 16 years old, and they're wrinkly, and there's no way to fix
Yeah,
it.
you
You have to
don't
tear
want
them
to.
out. And then it becomes a safety issue.
Okay.
So so that's why that item is highlighted. The rest of these are all as they were in the Citizens Bond Committee process. You'll recall a couple of bond issues ago, we purchased an existing building for a child nutrition warehouse expansion. It came with a fairly sizable office space that would need substantial renovation before it could be occupied. It's never been renovated and thus never been occupied. The purpose of this would be to renovate that space, including HVAC and a lot of interior work, such that it could be occupied by a department, perhaps child nutrition and perhaps not, perhaps others. That's the purpose of that project. South Transportation is a very old facility. It's the only one left that is the original facility. So this is the proposal is a complete replacement of the facility we have at South Trans to bring it in line with the ones that we have built more recently. All of you are familiar with the work we've done over time at Glen Oaks. We've done 2 rounds of projects at Glen Oaks to modernize that facility, and this is a continuation of that effort. Essentially 2/3 of the front of Glen Oaks has been done. This is the remaining 1/3 that is the front of Glen Oaks, again, to continue that work at that much older campus.
And the next phase in the master plan is where we move into the classroom areas, right?
Yeah, the pods.
Yeah,
There are
that's
2
correct.
remaining pods that are there.
So, and again, when you look at these projects being recommended on campuses, these are all coming after the board has seen the master plan. This is the next phase of that work and our best estimate of cost, given the caveat that I gave you at the beginning of this. So on to the next slide, we've got the administrative area, a classroom building, as well as library at Powell Elementary, in keeping with the next phase of the master plan. Somewhat similar project at Westwood Terrace, cafeteria to include obviously the platform, and then a standalone gym that you're all familiar with that we're very much trying to get taken out and connected to the cafeteria, such that the campuses has a large flexible space like we would at campuses we've built in the last decade and a half. Classroom building replacements at Colby Glass and Valley High, and a very substantial project at Colby Glass and Mary Hull to do classroom replacements. And then as far as a project that's essentially the same scope as the one at Westwood Terrace. So these are all campuses in that 50, 60-year-old bracket where we're going to propose to go back and do large-scale renovation. That continues on the next slide. So Colonies North, a similar project, Cable, Meadow Village. That's the list of elementaries that would receive very large-scale renovation projects, starting on slide 8 with Glen Oaks and then finishing on slide 10 with Meadow Village. Then we get into some substantial middle school and high school work. At Rayburn Middle School, this is actually the last in a very multi-phase project to bring that campus in line with newer ones. This is the last phase of that project. If this were approved, we would get that work done and actually finish construction at Rayburn Middle School for the first time in I cannot remember how long.
Long time.
Substantial work on athletics and CTE at Pat Neff that would be a continuation of that master plan along with the piece that has just now been completed.
Can you remind me, I remember the master plan piece, and is that the one that we've done where it was cafeteria moving back?
That's correct.
This is that.
This is that piece. It will hit the 2 gyms that we have there, and the two CTE Fine Arts facilities are right behind it, where we should be the old shops, so to speak.
And what
It's
are
that
we
whole
doing, what are
quadrant,
we
and then
doing
we
with
did
that standalone gym? That's going away, right?
Yes,
I just remember that it was this long.
exactly.
In the
It's-
middle,
Yeah.
that was going to be. And then what stage is that on Pat Neff? Is that the last, no.
No,
I'm
there's,
trying to think what else.
There's two major projects, groups of projects very likely that are left. This is the first of those. And that second phase might even have to be divided into two. But
But we did the front, we did the cafeteria, admin and counselors, right?
correct.
And then we
That's
did the
one
science.
just
Are those
completed.
classrooms over on the right?
That's science. That was in a previous
Yeah.
bond before 28.
Okay, so all that area's been done, and,
So now we're working our way towards the back.
okay, and then we're pulling all of that, and then I guess the rest will be that still remaining older section of classrooms on the right-hand side.
That is true.
And so this will, well, how will this pull in the fine arts piece?
well, that would be the next phase where we would do some
Okay, so this is
renovations
pulling
and
everything
additions.
from the
which-
left,
That's correct.
right?
Yeah.
And then because you got your fine arts right here.
Yeah, there's a
and then
little
that older
standalone
wing.
building, kind of in the tail end at the campus that would need some renovations and possibly some additions, but that would be the next phase.
And
Pat
what about
Neff.
the ALE rooms?
The ALE rooms were done 2
'Cause-
bomb programs or 1 bomb program
Yeah,
ago.
they're fine then.
They're fine. We
Okay.
had 2 ALE rooms that we renovated about, I want to say 7 years ago.
Yeah, I remember.
And that was one of that was under, where the departments asked us to seriously consider ALEs throughout the entire district. That was one of the higher priorities because of the size and the amenities that they did not have
I
at
know, we
the
did the
school.
washer and dryer, all of that area, I believe, in there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So moving on to the Marshall project, y'all know with the construction of the auditorium and the library and previous projects and the completion of the LMS front of the building, there's that middle portion of Marshall at the front that's still left, which is called the A building. And that is this project. It's the old admin suite and a bunch of classroom replacements in the middle of the front of that campus. Next phase on that project as well. On the next slide, we're on to a continuation of the master plan at Holmes High School, a substantial project that would be the cafeteria and kitchen, which is currently in a round building, along with the athletics portion of that building and the rest of the athletics, the original athletics areas to include PE space and locker rooms and so forth. So it's a complete redo of that portion of the Holmes campus. And again, we've looked at that.
And that was in the
Master plan.
center, right, Brian? In the
It's
back, in the center?
middle of the campus, that's correct. Next project is a building for a proposed new building on the O'Connor campus to highlight some new agriculture science programming, and also to give that program its own administrative area that is unique to that program, as we do at our other high school magnet schools. Another very substantial project at John Jay High School, one of our older high schools. This is, if you're picture John Jay, we're getting ready to kick off a project that's on the far left of that campus. That's that fine arts facility. This would be on the opposite end of that campus. This would create a unique space for the Science and Engineering Academy. They do not have one now. It would also do substantial work on ROTC as well as our Career and Technology program and address some parking on that right side of the building, if you can picture that in your mind. At Stevens High School, you've seen the conceptual design of Cast Teach, which is a new magnet program that actually begins with its first cohort of students in August of this year, believe it or not. And so that's, again, an administrative area for that program, as well as some additional classroom space. I believe we bring the schematic design on that to the board very soon.
Building comes.
Hobby Middle School, these next three projects are all middle school magnet projects. They vary in cost, but for a couple of reasons. One is because of the scope is different in some. It's just easier to do at some campuses than others. And this also incorporates when they would be proposed to be built in the order of things. But these are in line with the projects that we have done at both Jones and Zachary middle schools. Obviously different programming, but middle school magnets. Moving on to, still under renovation and reconstruction, but moving on to some smaller projects that are also proposed to be included. We talked a little bit ago about ALE upgrades. You can see a proposal for an upgrade to that group, for that group of students at Knowlton. You can see a continuation of athletics and PE locker room and flooring upgrades. This is a continuation of an initiative we began at least a couple of bond proposals ago. A sensory play area, which is trying to meet the needs of special needs students, but would be open to any student, but specifically constructed to address the needs of special needs students on our playgrounds at all elementary schools. A library modernization package. As the board knows, we've been trying over the years to make our libraries a more flexible space where furniture can be moved around and the library can be reconfigured depending upon the needs of the campus at any one time. This is a continuation of that effort. When we went about that in the past, we found that some of the stacks that hold physical books, we do still have physical books, were bolted to the ground. And so this is a project that'll help us create a more flexible space at those older campuses.
And how many will it address, Brian?
Leroy, do we have a count?
I want to say about 80% of our schools is, I have the numbers somewhere, but it's about 80% of our schools that do not have the flexibility, that have, like Dr. Woods mentioned, the stacks.
So how does that work in with the master plans that we have on these campuses for full library redos?
It works with it, they're in conjunction with each other. So in other words, this will not touch anything that we do in the for a library. For example, if we go to Powell, for example, that's listed here for a complete renovation, including the library, it would not be included here.
So all we're talking about is just replacing stacks to movable stacks, probably more.
Yeah,
So we're not doing any, because what I don't want, Leroy, is for us to be spending money now, and then in the next 4 years
That's
from now,
correct.
in the next bond, we're going to have a full library update at one
So
of these schools. So are we,
yes, we're looking at the master plan and where we think we're going to be here in the near future in terms of another bond, particularly another bond or bonds, where the master plan tells us we're going to go and take those apart. Now remember, this is minor work that happens within the campus, within the library. The stacks get completely replaced with the movable furniture that we now have in our newer schools and some other
so
schools.
probably new flooring if these are
Exactly,
molded
because
down. I mean, if these are bolted down and we're pulling them,
There's no carpet underneath it, so when you yank that up, there'll be a strip.
so it'd be carpet and then just
Exactly.
the movable stacks.
Exactly.
Is really pretty much there may be some repair work on some of the walls
And
if there's
there will
something
be.
that we do, but we're not talking a major,
No, not at all.
okay.
So fume hood replacements, fume hoods exist in in science classrooms where students are working with chemicals that require those chemicals to be properly vented outside of the room. On to the next.
But I'm assuming on those, though, Brian, that we're not talking about any of those schools that have had recent science upgrades.
That's correct.
Right.
Schools where we haven't done recent work and do not plan to go in the near future either.
Okay.
So still with renovation and reconstruction on the next slide, you can see the project. Wait a second.
Yeah, the next two are.
Yeah, I've got duplicates.
We've already seen, it's on the
Yeah, sorry about that. We've got duplicate slides, so it appears that 13 and 14 are both the same duplicate slide. Apologize for that. We'll get that cleaned up. So moving on, then I'm now starting the new structure under, the new category under infrastructure. And so any questions here are going to have to be handled largely by Jacob. But these are, as you will see, the kinds of projects we get from our maintenance and facilities group, where we're going in and doing large-scale replacement work on things like chillers and air handlers, HVAC systems, roofing systems, and so forth. So you can see 12 sites on chiller replacements. You can see what those schools are. And again, these are prioritized from our maintenance group. 14 sites on air handlers, which move the air within the school. On the next slide, where it talks about multi-zone unit ventilators, this is the other half of the project that we asked for the board's consideration on out of ESSER funds. These are the systems that are the least efficient, that we will do 11 schools under the ESSER funds and propose to complete that work out of a potential bond in 2022, and you can see the campuses that would be impacted. Rooftop units are also HVAC work. Then we move on to things like boilers, a number of sites, and energy controls.
Let me ask on the energy controls, because I know that we've done energy control upgrades at O'Connor previously.
We've done we've done some, but at O'Connor, for the most part, we're going to redo about 80% of the controls, because some we've touched with newer facilities and upgrades, but we haven't touched the older part.
Okay, so it goes back to that question though, Leroy, how do you plan on this? What is what you do so that we're not, because a lot of these things, I know that we have touched schools on some of these things previously. And so how do you plan this out that
Right, so
that you're not going to come back 4
No.
years from now and say, okay, now we need to
No.
do upgrades with energy controls at O'Connor.
Right. So we there's 2-3 criteria that we use for energy controls. So we have what we call, like at O'Connor and several of these, we have still pneumatics. We're not even in the digital age. And those were original 20, 30 years ago. And so as we start, renovating and upgrading pieces of a campus, we upgrade that piece, but there's still the old pieces that are still there. So these energy controls, this is the second time we do this, and we're going systematically through the entire district and starting to get the old devices out of there, the controllers that are very, very old, and also the pneumatics to change it to a more digital age.
And
So
what
we have not touched significantly some of these schools that are here through any other program that we have.
And what are we doing, because this technology changes so much, so what are we doing to make sure that we're using something that's going to take us into 10 years, 15 years? What are you doing on
Obviously, we
that?
ask our engineers and the suppliers and vendors that provide these types of devices to see where we're going to be. These are very proprietary, I can tell you that much. It's a unit that is sold by somebody that can only service that particular unit, that control.
Yeah, we've had that
And
kind of
the engineers
discussion
are telling me
before.
to do what we call open protocol, which means that we can connect with various types of, different types of systems and processes that make this all work. So to answer your question, Ms. Chumley, we seek a lot of input from the industry, but we also seek a lot of input from our engineers.
Okay, because if you seek it from the industry, what happens is you have, like you and I've talked many times on this, you've got, and I don't know if I'm using the right word, distributors or manufacturers or
Right.
whatever, but they are tied to a specific company
Correct.
that they rep for.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure that when we're using the people that we do business with, that we're not tying ourselves to something, and that we're actually looking at this in a manner that really doesn't tie into who sells what, but what is the technology that we're needing to
Right.
look at, and what are we needing to do? I don't know, Leroy, I have real concerns on that. I don't have concerns on us doing the work, but I do have concerns on us just because of the nature of the beast of the industry.
Yeah, so it might remind the board that we have 3 vendors that provide energy controls to the entire district. We're centralized, but there's 3 vendors because of competition. Many moons ago, Northside decided that we're going to do 2 vendors. We just added a 3rd vendor that provides our control systems. In other words, it's the person that we can allow to bid on our projects, so we don't have 20 or 30 different controls.
But by doing that, you are limiting yourself
Yes,
with
but-
just the controls that those individuals are the ones that sell to with
Yes, ma'am.
specific manufacturers.
Our-
And I guess my question on that, Leroy, is when we're looking at this,
Yes.
my expectation is that we are not looking to those 3 vendors, when there may be another vendor out there that has the latest, greatest technology, but they don't happen to be one of those 3.
The other
And we're
factor,
limiting ourselves, so.
the other factor that we look at, Ms. Chumley, is our maintenance staff. I've got to provide them consistency in the way that we operate, because they can't service those. That means we're going to be vulnerable. And so there's another factor that we look at to make sure that they can maintain our facilities.
And our maintenance staff is used to using those 3 vendors those 3, whatever level they are, that we use. What I'm just saying, Leroy, is I would like to see a different approach when we come to this
Okay?
in relation to, I don't want to count on the 3 distributor, I don't know what you call them, the
Well,
vendors,
they're
distributors.
suppliers of the
Suppliers.
programming that makes everything work.
I want us
Absolutely.
to look outside of that. I don't want us tied into those three groups.
Right.
And I want us to
The-
be able to look at whatever, because when you go online and look at some of this stuff, there's so much technology on the energy piece of things that I would just, so I'm just
This-
bringing this out now because I
Sure.
know we
This-
need to do it, but I don't want us to do it in the manner that we have done in the past.
This proposition is just to change outdated systems for the controllers and things of that nature. The type that we use can be discussed at a later time.
Okay, I just want us to make sure that we're looking at what is the newest and greatest and what's
Okay.
going to give us the best bang for the buck on the long-range
Right.
piece of this. Thank you.
Okay, on the next slide, we've got electrical upgrades proposed at 6 sites. You see them listed there, as well as lighting upgrades and a substantial amount of paving and drainage work. This is the kind of thing that back when we were putting together bond proposals, when the district was extremely fast-growing and we had to dedicate such a large percentage of the dollars in a particular bond to new schools, it was very hard to get to this work. And so you can see a substantial amount proposed here, and in each case, you see the sites listed for upgrades. Moving on to,
I have a question, I'm sorry. I have a question for
Go ahead, Mr. Lopez.
Leroy, on the paving drainage, upgrade 18 sites, do we know how old these grades or roads on the campuses are? I mean, is there like a street rating
The-
or road rating? I mean, typically the city will rate a road,
Yeah.
50, 30, 100 being good, 30 being bad. Do we have any of those ratings on each of
We-
these campuses when it comes to paving?
We actually ask our maintenance department to be able to look at these particular schools to see where the failures are at. And they use the maintenance program to track the maintenance of these particular sites. For example, the paving, if they've patched it up 10 times in the last 5 or 6 years, the chances are we're going to get failure, or there's failure already there somewhere. And so that's at the level that we are. So our maintenance department tracks these through work orders and things of that nature, and then they recommend to us the list that it's in a priority order to be able to replace these pavement sections.
Oh, okay, so probably very low ratings on the terrain as far as paving.
I can assure you, Mr. Lopez, that on some of these, there's failure right now. If you go to some of these campuses,
Yeah.
it's cracked and it's broken and has been patched so many times that it's pretty obvious.
You're absolutely correct, Leroy. You're absolutely correct. I was looking at the one on Ross Middle School, and I remember them having issues with that paving there. So
Right.
I was just curious. But yes, thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. I was just curious about the ratings and all of that. So, thank you.
So on that next slide, we look at tennis court upgrades. This includes work at both of the district tennis centers that are obviously for our competitive tennis program as well as for the community, and then work at a number of schools. These are not complete reconstructions. These are just renovation of the surface of the tennis court itself at all of those sites.
And that's the O'Connor site, the O'Connor tennis courts, not the new one that we built recently.
There's both are actually
Both.
in there.
Both of them
What's
are in
called the North Side Tennis Center is you can see in
How
the
old is
top
that?
line. Jacob age on.
How old is
That's
Northside Tennis
10.
Center?
It's at least 10 years old. I know that because I just got in here when we did the tennis center across
Is
the
it
street.
really?
But
The
it's
one at
about
O'Connor?
10, it's about 10 years old.
Oh my gosh, I didn't realize it was
and-
10
and-
years old.
And that one, Ms. Chumley, it's also about wear and tear. I mean, we got a lot of kids that go through that program.
Oh, yeah.
And they use it literally every day, the public use it as well.
Yeah,
And so
and
it just wears that
community, right.
surface down pretty fast like. And we have to do the surface because if we don't do it, then the infrastructure that supports it is going to get compromised. Now we got a bigger problem.
And of course, I'm going to remind Dr. Woods about our conversation about, and now I've gone completely blank on the name of the game but the one at Chicken and Pickleball?
Yeah.
Yes. And again, this is a continuation. We've had other bond programs that will keep us on a cycle to keep our tennis courts in good state of repair.
So moving on to replacement and waterproofing, roof replacement and waterproofing. And again, this is another thing that we do on a cycle. Believe it or not, this list actually started larger than it is. And you can see work proposed at 22 sites that were not impacted by the recent hail that you've seen us do work at over the last several years. And this is, again, a continuation of the cycle. And probably a larger list than you would have seen back in, say, 2007 or 2010. But again, going back to these older campuses and making sure that we've got solid roofing and waterproofing.
What is the waterproofing, Leroy?
Waterproofing is usually the face of the exterior of the building where we have that, where we have.
Split face block where we have all the pitting and
That's some of
the
it, Ms. Chumley,
problems?
but sometimes we don't have, the older buildings don't have the waterproofing inside the walls or in between the exterior. And so we got to protect it from the outside, so waterproofing. Tyker Building is really the only one there, if I remember correctly, that has waterproofing. Everything else is really roofing.
Okay.
So we're actually going to leave the infrastructure area. As you can see, there are a very large number of projects proposed in that kind of general area. Now we're going to move more specifically to safety and security. We're looking at fire alarm system replacements, door hardware replacements. Both of these are a continuation of what you've seen in previous bonds, just at other sites. And also a continuation is to replace surveillance cameras that are old and failing with newer units. There are a number of those, as you know, throughout the district, especially at schools, but also at central office facilities.
When we do all the schools that we did the security lobbies with, did we do the surveillance camera updates on those at the same time?
No, we added some cameras because of the security lobbies.
Just probably right at the front, but
we
not the
didn't
rest of the
replace. Now,
area?
remember, this is what I call phase 2. 18 bond replaced approximately, I want to say 50% of the surveillance in our ISMS team and police department. They give us the list of which ones are the priority, that they're failing. And remember, these units have been there since the 2004 and 2007 bond. So they're way overdue for replacement of cameras.
Okay.
So those projects are specifically under safety and security. That continues on the next slide, where we look at video server upgrades, which serve those security cameras, if you will. That's where the data is stored, the video is stored. And then access control is,
Bless you.
is who's being allowed into particular parts of a building, who has to use their badge to access it, and so forth. And so you can see a number of sites proposed for access control upgrades as well.
Brian, on the door hardware replacement, I remember we had a discussion a while back, somewhere in the last 2 years, maybe 3. We'd gotten some requests from subs at some of the high schools on how to lock down their rooms if we had an active shooter drill on their campus. Are we looking at that? I mean, was that addressed, and are we looking at
Yeah, I think
that
that,
within the door replacement?
I want to say we gave a presentation to the building committee 5-6 years ago. Because this is, again, this is a
Remember, we had the
continuing
slips
phase.
where they could pull out the,
Exactly, the little strips that we
Yeah.
have that just pull out the door so that they don't have to fool around with a key, things of that nature. But these are more even fundamental than that. They're still the knob doors that we have out there. So we need to get them upgraded just for the sake of maintenance, if anything else.
okay.
Yes.
So moving on then to technology, what you will not see that you have seen in previous bonds is replacement of classroom and campus technology for students and staff. That has been, in the past, that has made up the lion's share of the technology portion of the bond issue. As you recall, in the last 2 years, we have spent a lot of money, not bond money, on that effort, and so you do not see any of that proposed here. What you see is larger scale projects that affect the district as a whole, to include equipment upgrades at our data centers, network security upgrades to improve our ability to keep folks out of the network who don't belong, upgrades to the telephone system, which is aging out, and physically telephones, wireless the upgrades, which is a continuation and constant work in technology services, as well as cabling improvements as that technology has changed over time. That, believe it or not, that is the total of the technology requests in this bond.
That's different.
Very different from the past. On the next slide, there is a proposal to purchase some buses to include, and not just buses, also the mini buses that you're now familiar with seeing, as well as some multi-use vehicles like Suburbans that help us transport smaller groups of students without requiring somebody with a CDL, a separate, a different license from the state in order to drive it. As the challenge of finding bus drivers continues, we've diversified our fleet, and this would purchase both buses as well as those smaller.
Can, just real quick, Lori, so we just had Google Fiber come into our neighborhood, and when we're talking about the structured cabling upgrades, is that impacting us? And is that having a cost perspective to us? And does that impact this?
This is cabling internal to the building itself, but I can't answer the question about Google.
He's exactly right. So the cost here is associated with cabling within all of our north side facilities and campuses. The question to Google Fiber, really no relation to, as far as that's concerned with us, Ms. Chumley. I'll remind the board, we're under a long-term contract with a company called Conterra. We entered into that contract, I think, about 5 years ago to do a leased wide area fiber network. And so we already have fiber. It's not Google Fiber. It's provided by a company called Conterra. And so they maintain that leased network for us.
And how long is our contract with them?
I think it's a 20-year contract.
Okay, so we got quite a bit.
We
I
got
was
quite a
just
bit.
curious if that would make any difference to us. And of course, we got the hard sell pitch about how wonderful Google Fiber is. Dave, you've got it in your area too. all of our subdivision.
Yes, ma'am. I'm looking forward to the day it comes to my neighborhood. It hasn't yet. But I would anticipate when it's time to relook at the WAN services down the road, certainly if Google's a player in that, then we would welcome their bid on a competitive proposal, and hopefully they'd have some competitive.
And maybe within that time frame, they'll be throughout all of the city, because I know
Yes, ma'am.
they're not right now. I was just
Correct.
curious if it was going to make a difference to us,
Yes, ma'am.
because it makes a big difference on a personal cost,
Absolutely.
not a residential cost, so I was wondering if commercial buildings.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Question, I have another one more.
Lori, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
And I'm not sure the equipment or what you want to call it, but, now being that, we have now the pandemic and it created a lot of concerns and a lot of issues with internet connectivity. And there seems to be a big push for broadband and the expansion of free broadband, within the community. I was wondering on this, is there anything that we have on this as far as the technology component that would allow us as a school or a campus that would be able to expand our range or broadband range to nearby neighborhoods, allowing those children that may not have internet or have access to internet, but can tag off or lead up or tap into our system. Does that make sense? Do we have equipment, something like that? Are we looking at equipment like that in the future?
It makes, yes, sir, it makes absolute sense, and it's a great question, and one that Dr. Woods and I have actually bandied about a couple of times. The challenge with some of those networks, you're probably talking $60–70 million minimum for a district of our size to build out. But what I will tell you, you might remember my colleague Chris Trejo came and spoke to the board a few months back about a program that was offered through TEA called TACT. And so through that program, any family that wanted to take advantage of free broadband internet access had the opportunity to do so through Northside. So we're collaborating with TEA at this point, and we had a roughly 4-month window over the summer and the first couple months of school, and really tried to market and push that. And so any family that wanted to take advantage of that, and again, it's free internet access for a year, and we've actually submitted requests to use ESSER funds to extend that through a second school year. And so we've had families take advantage of that and are actively working to get them going through like an AT&T or Spectrum. Those are our two vendors that are signed up to participate in that program.
Well, thank you, Roy. I appreciate that. Great job on that. I was just curious. Thank you so much for that. I definitely understand the fact that, there's a lot of money involved in that. But that's good. Thank you. At least we're working towards trying to bridge that gap. So thank
Yes,
you.
sir.
Appreciate it.
Lori, one more question.
Yes, ma'am.
Any of these potential projects here, are they, can we claim any E-rate?
Yes, ma'am. If you
or
can
file
back
for
up one
E-rate?
slide, Monica, so I can look at that and let you know that wireless network upgrades and the structured cabling, so those last two projects, that $8 million, those projects in its entirety should be E-rate eligible, so we'd be eligible for up to 80% reimbursement for those programs. Yes, ma'am.
That'd be
So,
great.
so with that, Dr. Woods, would we figure that into this? I guess we still have to lay out the money first.
Still have to lay out the money. E-rate's a reimbursement program, and when we get E-rate reimbursements, those dollars are largely spent to help us continue to upgrade student and staff devices out into future years. The board has set aside some dollars for that purpose, and that's where those funds would largely be spent once they are received.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, not last, but close to, is bond management, which we have already visited about. And so I think the board has a good understanding of what the purpose of that line item is. That is also not a new line item. We have carried that in prior bonds as well. So, second to last is where there may end up being some substantial discussion and input needed. So as I indicated before, we identified two athletics projects that at a point in time we're sure both would need to stand alone, given the statute as it is written and the way the Attorney General has interpreted that statute in the, Naomi, 3 years or so since it has been updated. Yeah. So what the new learning and the reason the second of these projects is highlighted is that our understanding from bond counsel is that a relatively recent interpretation by the Attorney General's office would allow that project, the baseball softball complex adjacent to Sotomayor, to actually be included in the general proposition. In other words, it would not have to stand alone. Now, it could, but it would not have to stand alone as a separate proposition. On the other hand, our initial understanding of the George Block work, the aquatic center work, is that it would have to stand alone, and that remains the case today. So that's the reason it is not highlighted, frankly. So there are a couple of options for the board to consider. And keeping in mind the caveat that I gave to you early in this presentation about the kind of very recent learning we have from some districts bidding schoolwork that came in at a shockingly high cost, and our need to evaluate that, see if we can get some other data, and go and perhaps have to go back and look at some of these numbers before we bring it finally to the board, which is obviously going to happen very soon. We believe that we will have enough savings out of the 2018 bond to cover most, if not all, of one of these projects. And so there has been some conversation internally in the past that one option to handle this proposal would be to look at baseball, softball being covered by those savings that I mentioned, and put George Block out there as its own proposition. And so essentially we would have a two-proposition bond. The general proposition that would include everything else that you've seen, and then the work at George Block Aquatics that would stand alone. That's one way to structure the bond. Another way to think about it is to actually include the baseball softball complex in the general proposition, because that is allowed to be done, and utilize savings to do the George Block work, thus not having to have it stand on its own proposition. Now, the caveat there about George Block is we're not as confident we can completely afford that project all in one fell swoop out of savings. So there is some possibility that once that work got started and we could see what pricing was looking like, we might have to do that work in more than one phase. And we've spoken with the architect, and they have identified a way to do that should that be necessary. They've actually identified a way to do it in 2 phases or in 3 should it be needed. So what we're talking about here is the number of propositions that would need to be, that the election would need to be called with, and obviously what the size of those dollar figures would be. If Sotomayor is included in the overall general proposition, it will obviously be larger than it would be otherwise, clearly. And so that's obviously something to consider as well. So what I thought we'd do, Mrs. Freeman, is we've kind of got a summary slide that has dollars on it. Again, please keep in mind the caveat that I mentioned. And then I thought we'd come back to this and have some conversation about how the board would like to see this structured, that then I can turn into a recommendation to bring to the board at your next meeting. So if we can advance the slide and then we'll come back to that. So here is the way the total proposition is looking to date. If you take everything that has been shown to the Citizens Bond Committee, that came back from the Citizens Bond Committee as a recommendation, everything that was budgeted to date. So excluding the two projects that we just talked about, $938.9 million to do those all the rest of that work, that would be the general proposition. And then there would obviously be the question of how do we handle these two other projects? What is the board's desire on how to handle those two other projects? You can see that that regardless of the decision, the total dollar figure as we budgeted it in the fall came in under $1 billion at just over $990 million. Should all those projects be included in a bond proposal? Again, we think that at least one of those projects at the end could be paid for out of bond savings from the 2014 and 2018 bonds. So if we could, we'll just go back to that slide before, and again, these are the projects that I think there needs to be discussion on, and I'm happy to take any questions or comments from the board about where we stand.
Questions? Dr. Woods, I'll go back to what I said before too. So with the George Block Aquatic Center, if it wasn't a standalone project, is there anything that we would be doing within the scope of the project that would qualify to be able to put into the larger portion of the bond?
No, ma'am. Our understanding from the attorney, and I'll look to Renee to get confirmation, is essentially if we touch that facility in any meaningful way, it must stand alone.
Like chiller, like all of the AC or electrical or nothing?
If we only did replacement of infrastructure work and did not touch I think the facility itself to include seating or the pool, which would be largely not at all what we're trying to accomplish in this project, I think that could certainly be done. But anything that's substantive with regard to seating or locker rooms, or certainly the pool itself, is going to require it to stand alone if it is in a bond issue.
Someone else?
Aaron, just piggybacking on what you said, is there a way that baseball softball complex could partner with something with Sotomayor, kind of like the volleyball, the gym at O'Connor was used as a district volleyball location for a while?
Yes, and I should have been more clear. The district baseball and softball complex can be included in the general proposition. It can be included as an instructional space, essentially, according to the bond attorney on a recent interpretation from the Attorney General's office. So it does not have to stand alone. The board could choose for it to, but it does not have to.
So I'm just, that would be one thought or one recommendation, but I'm trying to tie it back to what was in the survey. Was there anything in the survey that gave indication as to a preference with either parents or staff or, I don't remember anything, but I'm wondering if I missed anything that might help us make that decision.
No, ma'am, we did not. You did not miss anything. There's nothing that I see in the survey data that would help decide which of the two projects you wanted to stand alone, if either.
I thought there was something in there that, oh, I'm sorry, Gerald, go ahead.
So going back to what what Carol was saying, you know, looking at, being that we can put the softball complex, adjacent to the, so we can kind of put that with next to the minor, area. That would go back into, we wouldn't have to have it as a separate bond proposal, or a separate bond prop. So that would basically say, so from 938 million, we would to put that 23 million into the general bond, which would make it 960, right, 970, right? Only leaving the block aquatic center as the only prop out there, right?
That is one, that is,
one option, right?
that is one option.
Okay. Or pay for it through bond savings.
That is only that is also an option. Let me be clear though, both of those athletic projects cannot both be paid for out of bond savings.
Sure, right. Okay, thank you.
There is a slide 9 that shows athletics and fine arts improvements on the survey.
There is, but it doesn't get as granular as which of the two athletics projects would you prefer, which is how I understood Dr. Harrell's question.
No, but when we're looking at, from just a cost perspective on having to have a standalone proposition that's going to be athletic, would that slide help us on any of that, Brian?
It doesn't
Well,
because.
it says under 50 million.
Right. It doesn't because through all this process, what we became clear on is that the fine arts work that we're talking about can be included in the general proposition because it is obviously an instructional space. It will be used on the campus all day
Right.
As an instructional space.
I guess what I'm thinking is just when we're talking about a standalone proposition for an athletic facility, that on the phone survey 1, slide 9, shows a certain figure that if it's under, it would be supported, and that would be under that.
That's true. Regardless of if either of these stood alone, it would be under that threshold.
But you said that we don't have to have the district baseball or softball standalone because they can go under the Santa Mayor.
They can go
I mean, they can go under the one proposition.
That is correct.
Okay.
Mr. Blunt?
Yeah, I guess my thought is, take the district baseball, softball, use savings for that part of it. If that fits to me, that just seems to be a really good solution. And the block aquatic center, in my mind, is we can clearly show the need, separate from, and I'm glad you pointed out the survey one, the need, and the story can be told that, hey, look, we've got to have this, et cetera, then we go to propositions. And that's sort of my thought.
Mr. Blunt, my question would be, oh, I'm sorry, I see. You said two propositions, not keeping the softball complex separate. You're talking about rolling the softball complex into the first.
No, not said rolling, no,
Oh,
mine is, no,
payment.
you pay for it out of savings.
I see, I'm
And
sorry.
don't add that amount in there, and then you get you to 968,000 with two propositions, 938.9 and then one at 30,000. We just need to build out, maybe by next week if we don't decide now, but to say this is a story we would tell what the needs are for the Block Aquatic Center.
Yes,
I'm in
Mr.
agreement with,
Mr.
I'm in agreement with Bobby as well.
The only-
Having those two propositions, but, and then the new district, baseball and softball complex to be supplemented by the savings.
I guess my concern is we talk about bond savings, and we're still, I think we have some idea as to what we would have left, but if inflation eats up what we have left and any of this, then we have a challenge.
That is always a danger.
So which one has the greatest impact? How am I phrasing this? Not having which one of those will have the greatest impact on the largest number of students?
Very clearly, George Block.
I agree. Just from the standpoint of chiming in for the safety, swimming is not it's developmental, and as we expose children for all ages as well as middle age and even higher in age, it's just an all-around great for the community.
I think the key difference in the two projects, if we're ignoring for a moment the cost and what has to stand alone and so forth, is that baseball, softball is just that. We're talking about a competition facility for our high school varsity baseball and softball programs. And I don't want to minimize that. That's a lot of kids.
It is a lot of kids.
The difference with George Block is that it's an impact on our students, clearly, in our high school competitive swimming programs, but it's also got a pretty far-reaching community impact, because if you come by this facility during the middle of the school day, when our competitive swimmers are in English or science class, that facility is used constantly by community members, where we're teaching kids how to swim, or we're giving community swim time to families, or we're opening it up to adult competitive swimming competitions. So when I think about it just from an impact standpoint, right, if you just said, ignore the dollars, ignore the change in the law about propositions, the swimming facility impacts a lot of people, many of which are our students, but many of which are community members and as young as 3 years old learning how to swim.
Which means we'll have to make sure, if it's on a separate proposition, that all those groups are notified and understand the impact, because I want to make sure we all understand the impact of this if that proposition does not pass. Because then our community will have told us that they don't want us to upgrade that center, and we're not going to be able to come back in and use bond funds to do that if that proposition were to not be supported by our community. And that's what I'm concerned about, that just because people are so angry and hateful right now, and it worries me.
Yeah, I think that
this will be a focus, and for the wrong reasons.
That is the chief negative of that particular plan. If you had some folks vote no, perhaps without understanding the true story that I just told you about how that facility is used, and then you would definitely not be able to use any kind of bond funds, whether it be savings or whatever, to go and do substantial work there. You could address some relatively minor maintenance, large-scale maintenance work, but anything dealing with the size of the pool itself, the number of kids who can swim in there at any time, the number of swim lessons can be taught, and so on and so on and so on, would not be able to be addressed with bond funds. So that is, I would say, the chief negative, and perhaps the only negative, substantial, of that option.
In Friday letter, Brian, can you send us again tell us what Friday letter we can find it, the stats in relation to how standalone propositions for athletic facilities did throughout the state?
We can send you that. Renee, just help me remember to get that pulled, and we can send you that. It's not a pretty picture.
And I don't want to take the chance of us failing this facility because people are just mad versus failing it. There's two differences. If people just really don't want, if our community doesn't want it, then we need to listen to them. But I'm not sure that's I'm worried about this being failed as a separate one just because it's an easy target from people who are angry. And that really worries me.
I think we've had the same, I know we've had the same conversation in the past, because we've always had the option, that we don't have an option here about having to split it But in the past, we've had an option of having different propositions. And the discussion that we've had is sometimes when you ask people to support something, for some reason, there's an inclination. It's just maybe human nature, I don't know what it is. But you give them an option to vote against a particular project. And sometimes it's, we just have to do our best. If we went in with two propositions, we'd have to do our best that everybody understood
And all those groups
what it,
that would be
the
impacted.
significance or the impact, but we've chosen not to separate.
And I'm really worried about inflation.
Absolutely, Mr. Lopez?
Brian, do we have information that centers around, the district baseball and the complex? Do we have data, and I'm sure we do, but looking at the cost, and the location of where we're going to put the complex at, so I'm imagining Taft High School will be able to have, the baseball, games there as well as, Sotomayor, and then I'm thinking O'Connor, I'm kind of thinking of schools that
O'Connor.
would use that facility. Do we know what schools would be using that? I'm sure it would be the local schools around it, right?
Right, we try to schedule by,
I'm trying to justify a reason to say, we need a baseball field, we also need the aquatic center. And so, that's what I'm really trying to focus on here.
just like we do in sports like basketball and volleyball, we try to make the home stadium for that campus the one that's geographically the closest. Obviously, that's not always the case. Folks play basketball and volleyball at gyms around, but we do try to prioritize that in scheduling.
Right. Well, and there's a cost to that, right? Because, you've got to bus those kids to do the transportation, the gas, the food, that goes to, from Holmes High School to Super.
That is
And I mean, there are, a lot of factors that go with that, the travel time, the cost of fuel now that is going up. I'm looking at a lot of those factors, and now that, the city's growing, especially in that area, I see it, the need for it, and I do agree with Bobby, we need to pay for it, bond savings, I like that idea, right? It shows the public that we're investing the savings that we have to make this, to go with this, to build this complex, we're showing them that we're being wise with their money, so I like Bobby's idea about that, it makes a lot of sense. So that was just what I was just curious about, the need and trying to justify it to the public. So, without it having to be on the separate bond, separate prop, so. But I'm more in line with what Bobby said. Thank you.
Can I share where I am on it? So where I am on it
What are your
is,
thoughts?
is-
We're not voting?
no, but I'm just saying where
Right.
my thoughts are on this, which they could change. When we looked at what type of renovations were needed on George Block, I know we looked at it in a scope of different things that could be done. And I'm wondering if we couldn't look at the George Block changes or upgrades, kind of like we do our master plan on other facilities, where, okay, this is the essential, we have to have this done, which was the pool. And have that built where we can accommodate the other two phases if we were paying that out of bond savings, because I'm real worried about the inflation piece as well. My preference is that we put the baseball and softball complex in the bond, since we can do that within the Santa Mayor upgrades. and use bond savings to master plan and make the changes on the aquatics, and we run with one proposition.
The answer to the question is yes. We can phase the work at George Block to be done in multiple phases, either 2 or 3, and that could be done over a period of time to make it affordable at that time. So yes, that can be done.
So I'm
Leroy's already confirmed with the architect.
And I know, I'm thinking back on all the past bonds we've had, and I know that I've always been the one that was a supporter of, if we have the needs, then we put it out there and we trust our community and we go. And I think I've done that on every bond that we've ever had, is that if we need, and we can justify the needs, then this is not the same environment that we have been in the past. And I'm worried about that piece of it. And so I would prefer to have one proposition, because I would hate to have Block on a separate proposition and then it fail, because then it ties our hands to be able to do anything with it other than the basic maintenance. And that facility needs more than basic maintenance. So, and I trust our community with the major piece of this, the main project. But Karen, I think having 2 propositions just allows a person to go in who's angry, wants to send a message, say, okay, I'll vote yes for this one and I'll vote no for that one. And I'm very worried about it, so.
In building committee, as we looked at the renovation project of the Block Center, we had, I don't know, I can't remember. I think there were 3 perhaps
We did,
different
we had 3 separate
options. And I guess I would like to see what sacrifices that we would be looking for or looking at if we chose to renovate the Block Center with
one of the other
bond
options.
savings. So what, how would that, we've seen the look as to what the Block Aquatic Center would look like as quoted in this bond, but I don't know what we could do with it in bond savings and what that phasing, Dr. Woods, would look like. Is there an opportunity for you to break that down, or?
I think not.
Okay.
I think it would take substantial study. Really, all I can confirm is that the architect says, yes, we could do it in multiple phases. It would not you wouldn't have to outlay all the dollars in any one phase. I don't think there's going to be time to do the level of analysis that you're
But we would
suggesting.
get it to where, if we phased it in over time, we could get it to where we anticipate it looking with this particular proposal if we pulled it out.
It's a broad yes, but it's a yes.
Okay.
Obviously, what you sacrifice is it would last a lot of years.
There'd be lots of construction. Because the first part, though, was the pool and the pool deck, having the large, I mean, it needs a larger pool.
Well, and I
And
mean,
then
just
all of the,
practically, that could not be phase 1, right? Phase 1 would have to be the shell of the building to accommodate the inside work.
Yeah,
And
so I
so,
was just gonna-
so the sacrifice potential sacrifice you're making is you get the project started, but it's not in the phase that has impact on kids and families. So,
I was thinking we need,
and
we
we'll just have
probably
to
need to
commit
look
to
at.
that. But
Yeah.
we're speculating a lot about what would be affordable and all of that. But just from a practical standpoint, you couldn't reconstruct the pool before you reconstructed the outer shell of that facility.
So when we say a lot of years, then I guess what could we do? Do you know what the scope or what we could do in the next 4 years before we had to look at another bond proposal? Does that make sense?
I don't have any sense of that because I can't predict how much savings is going to be available when we go to
Right.
do this project.
done.
Because remember, we don't set aside savings for any one thing. Savings helps us in lots of ways to enhance a project that's already been approved in a bond, to do additional projects that the board has considered and approved above and beyond what's been in a bond. And so there's just too many variables involved to give a definitive answer to that question.
And the good news is that because we've been attentive and we pay attention to, we take our responsibilities, fiduciary responsibilities very seriously, so we do have some savings. But
That is correct. We do have some savings, which leads to my confidence that some of this work can be done with savings. What I can't promise is how much, because we're talking about predicting the
Right.
future.
So I guess my thought on this is, with bond savings, we may not be able to do much with the savings in the next 4 years anyway. So if we put it on a separate proposal and I hate to say, if it didn't pass, then, what are we gaining by using bond savings? Am I making, is that?
You are. I think you're looking at it kind of from if the worst-case scenario panned out and we really didn't have a lot of savings, and so we could only do minimum work there, what's the loss of putting the whole thing on a proposition? I guess the other, and so I get that, it makes sense to me. The other way to look at that, though, is the opposite of that, and that is a year from now, a year and a half from now, we look at this project, we look at our savings, and we think we can afford most, if not all, of the work out of savings. It's just, and chances are we're in between somewhere in reality, right? It's just, it's just impossible to predict.
We don't know what the inflation's going to be, though. That's what is really scary to me.
Well, you never know, really, what's going to happen to construction costs and so forth, nor labor costs. It's just that it's been particularly challenging given what we've dealt with the last couple of years.
We're in a different environment now, Brian, than we have been.
No doubt. Yeah, no doubt.
Anyone else? Okay, Dr. Woods?
So this comes back to the board for a vote on our regular board meeting.
That is correct. So what I will do is take the conversation that we've had tonight and turn that into a recommendation to the board that will include the costs involved. And as I said before, if we revise any of those costs, given this new knowledge between now and then, we'll highlight that for the board. And it would also involve how the bond would be structured. In other words, how many propositions would be considered and exactly what is being recommended under each proposition. So there would be actually 3 items presented at that board meeting related to this. One is what I just laid out. How are we going to structure the bond itself and what is its ultimate size and so forth. Then there would be the board actually calling for an election if the board chooses to take action in that. And then finally, as a more technical matter, the board agreeing to operate that election in conjunction with Bexar County. So 3 different items related to this, starting with this first one that we've been having this whole conversation about tonight.
To be clear, what was the recommendation of the Citizens Bond Committee? I know they had it as 3 separate propositions. So what was their recommendation?
Was it
We
3?
really didn't get into with the Citizens Bond Group how to structure it. What we talked about with the Citizens Bond Group is what projects would you like to see us do? All the subcommittees were unanimous that they wanted to see all the projects that were proposed done. But we really, it's such a technical matter, as you can tell from this conversation we've had tonight. We really thought that best decided by the team of 8.
Okay. Before we adjourn, anything else? Dr. Woods, is that the end of our agenda?
Yes, ma'am. That's what we have for you tonight. Appreciate your time.
Okay, if there are no objections, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all. Appreciate your time and you being here.